Did you know that one of the most influential books in American history was written by a Native American woman? And when I say influential, I mean it helped kick off the entire American Revolution. Well, her name was Betty Washington, wife of George Washington's brother, and she wrote a book about her captivity at the hands of the Iroquois during the French and Indian War, but more on that later. The creation of the United States was an incredibly complex process that did not happen overnight. It was the result of centuries of cultural, economic, and political changes. The United States emerged as a new nation after declaring independence from the British Empire in 1776. However, the foundations of the United States can be traced back to the early 17th century with the establishment of the first English colonies in North America. The first permanent English settlement in North America was Jamestown, Virginia, founded in 1607. This was followed by the establishment of other colonies such as Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay Colony, and Connecticut, which were primarily established for religious reasons. As more colonies were established, a distinct American identity began to emerge, shaped by the diverse cultures and experiences of the settlers. During this time period, the colonies were largely self-governing, with each colony developing its own system of government and laws. This fostered a sense of independence and self-reliance among the colonists, which would become a key characteristic of the United States. The colonial period also saw the rise of slavery in the American colonies. The first enslaved Africans arrived in Virginia in 1619, and slavery would become a brutal and inhumane institution that would have a lasting impact on American society. As the colonies grew and developed, tensions began to rise between the colonists and the British government. The British began to impose more restrictions on the colonies, such as the Stamp Act and the Tea Act, which led to protests and resistance from the colonists. The growing discontent among the colonists eventually culminated in the American Revolution. The American Revolution was a war fought between the United States and Great Britain from 1775 to 1783. The war was primarily fought over the issue of taxation without representation, as the colonists protested against the British government's increasing control and taxation of the colonies. The United States won the war with the help of France and other European powers, and this led to the creation of the United States as an independent nation. The creation of the United States was a significant event in world history. It marked the first time that a nation had been created on the basis of democratic principles, and it inspired other revolutions and independence movements around the world. The American experiment in democracy has had a profound impact on the course of world history, and the United States has become a symbol of freedom and democracy for people around the world. However, it is important to note that the creation of the United States was not a peaceful or easy process. It was a violent and divisive period in American history that resulted in the displacement and oppression of Native Americans and the enslavement of Africans. These injustices continue to have a profound impact on American society today. Despite its flaws, the creation of the United States was a remarkable achievement that has had a profound impact on the world. The American experiment in democracy has inspired people around the world to fight for freedom and independence, and the United States continues to be a symbol of hope and opportunity for people around the world. Imagine you are a Native American living in the 1700s. Your tribe has been pushed further and further west by European settlers who seem determined to take all of your land. Then, one day, out of nowhere, a group of men show up claiming to be from the British East India Company, but they don't seem interested in trading. Instead, they want to take your land, and they're willing to use force to do it. What would you do? Would you fight back? Would you try to reason with them? Or would you flee to safer territory? Well, whatever you decided, you probably wouldn't put up much of a fight because the odds would be stacked against you. See, at this point in history, European weapons were far more advanced than anything the Native Americans had. For example, guns were much more accurate and deadly than Native American bows and arrows. Plus, Europeans have things like cannons and mortar, which could level entire villages in seconds. On top of that, Europeans had steel armor that protected them from most attacks, while Native Americans were usually only wearing leather and cloth. Finally, Europeans had something else that gave them a huge advantage: numbers. By this point in history, thousands of Europeans had settled in North America, and they were constantly being joined by more immigrants. On the other hand, most Native American tribes only had a few hundred members, so they were vastly outnumbered by Europeans. So if any tribe tried to resist the Europeans, they would almost certainly be defeated. This was exactly what happened to the Pequot tribe in 1637. When the Pequots tried to defend their land against English settlers, they were quickly defeated and almost wiped out. Only a few dozen survived, and many of them had to live under the rule of their English captors. And speaking of captivity, one of the most famous books ever written about the history of the United States was actually written by a Native American woman who had been captured by the Iroquois. Her name was Betty Washington, and her book is called The Captivity and Restoration of Mrs. Mary Rowlandson. It tells the story of how she and her family were captured by the Iroquois during King Philip's War, and how she spent 12 weeks in captivity before being ransomed. The book was published in 1707, and it quickly became a bestseller. In fact, it was one of the most widely read books in America during the 18th century. Part of the reason that it was so popular was that it gave Americans a glimpse into the culture of the Iroquois. At this point in history, very little was known about Native American cultures, and most Europeans had never met a Native American. So reading Rowlandson's book was like getting a front row seat to Native American life. Another reason that the book was so popular was that it was a thrilling adventure story. Rowlandson and her family went through a lot during their captivity, and the book is filled with suspense and excitement. Today, however, the book is not nearly as well known. This is probably because it was written in the early days of American literature. And most people today are more familiar with modern writers like Stephen King and J.K. Rowling. Nevertheless, The Captivity and Restoration of Mrs. Mary Rowlandson is an important part of American history, and it is a fascinating look into one of the most important periods in U.S. history. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe this channel for more updates.